They filled my creek with concrete. Didn't ask, didn't warn, didn't even pretend to get it permitted, just poured cement right over it. Like nature was a nuisance. Like my land didn't matter. Like I wouldn't notice. But I noticed. And while they were busy planning flower beds and ribbon cuttings, I was preparing something else. Ever seen a pristine HOA pavilion turn into a swamp? Stay tuned to see what happens when arrogance meets groundwater, and one quiet woman refuses to be erased. Like, comment and subscribe for more real-world takedowns just like this. My name is Caroline Vance. I'm 57, widowed, third generation on this land. Quiet on the outside, but my roots run deeper than the creek they tried to bury. I live in the South Bend Loop subdivision, tucked behind the original farm plots that this whole town grew from. My grandparents owned 40 acres. My father sold most of it off when the factory came in. What's left now is my home, my garden, and the little spring-fed creek that's run through our backyard since the 1800s. I call it Margaret's Creek, after my grandmother. The neighborhood calls it that drainage ditch. Correction, used to call it that. Before the water started rising, the trouble started 2 summers ago when the HOA decided they needed a community pavilion garden. Their words, not mine. It was a wide, flat area behind the rec center, just downhill from my property line. Problem was, that land wasn't flat for no reason. That low spot was a natural runoff basin for Margaret's Creek. When it rained hard, the creek would swell, overflow a little, and settle gently into that area before draining off into the culvert. It had done that for decades, quietly, naturally, but the HOA wanted rose arches, gravel walkways, and a gazebo. So they brought in bulldozers, laid plastic underlayment, and started landscaping like the laws of water didn't apply to them. To fix the occasional wet ground, they rerouted the runoff right into a buried pipe that led through my property and dumped it behind my fence. And then, the worst of it, they poured concrete into the top of my creek, 6 feet across, 3 feet deep, sealed up like a culvert, boxed off like a gutter. No notice, no permits. Just noise and wet cement. When I confronted the project manager, a smug little man in a blue polo shirt and reflective vest, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "We're improving community drainage. You should be thanking us." The next day, I walked out to find the surface of the water gone. Just a concrete trench where Margaret's Creek had once danced and glimmered. I didn't cry. I just walked back inside, sat down with my tea, and opened my filing cabinet. Because the one thing they didn't know? I kept everything. I still had the original 1967 watershed survey my father requested. Still had the easement map from 1982. Still had the city's outdated but still active stormwater flow designations, which marked Margaret's Creek as a recognized surface stream. Meaning, you can't modify it, you can't reroute it, and you absolutely cannot bury it in concrete without an environmental variance, a public notice, and a stack of paperwork they never filed. They didn't just disrespect my land, they violated protected water code. But I didn't run to City Hall waving my papers. I knew better than that. People like me, older, rural, quiet, get labeled emotional real fast when we speak out. And the HOA? They had lawyers, influence, budgets for PR consultants, so I took a different route. I went to the Public Records Office. I filed for every permit they claimed to have. Got nothing. Filed again, this time using exact parcel numbers, legal names, and flow designations. Still nothing. Then I filed a third request, this time CCing the County Water Authority and attaching photos of the buried creek. The next week, I got a phone call. "Mrs. Vance, we'd like to come inspect your property. Line next Thursday, just to verify a few flow concerns." They came. Took photos. Measured. Wrote things down. They didn't say much. But 3 days later, I got a copy of their inspection report. Key sentence: unauthorized modification of a recognized surface waterway, resulting in increased downstream pressure and altered basin behavior. Translated, they broke the law, and I had proof, but still, I didn't go public. I waited. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences. See, Margaret's Creek wasn't gone. It was reaching for balance, and when the spring rains came in April, something incredible happened. The brand new Pavilion lawn, it started sinking, not quickly, not dramatically, just softly, the way a saturated sponge begins to swell. By the second storm, puddles appeared in perfect rings around the rose beds. By the third, the mulch washed away. And by the fourth, the gazebo tilted, a full 6 degrees off center. I stood on my porch and watched it happen, and still, I said nothing. Because while the HOA scrambled to find the problem, I was reading emails from the Water Authority and an attorney named Miss Halloran from the County Environmental Division. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just a mess. It was about to become a federal-level violation. Want to see how a quiet widow turned a fake garden into a certified wetland and forced the HOA to put up flood zone signs where their wedding venue used to be? Miss Halloran didn't introduce herself like most lawyers. No suits, no clipboard, just a tan field jacket, mud-caked boots, and a rolled-up set of site maps under her arm. She shook my hand with a grip that told me she'd dug more trenches. Then she'd filed lawsuits, and liked it that way. "Caroline?" she asked. I nodded. "I've reviewed everything. The pictures, the surveys, the water test results, and I'm going to be blunt." She spread out the map across my kitchen table and pointed to a boxed-in blue line labeled Margaret's Creek. They buried a Class C surface stream, illegally, and redirected its overflow into a basin that's now over capacity by about 38%. She looked up at me and smiled. "I hope you're ready, because you have leverage." Meanwhile, the HOA was scrambling. Not publicly, of course. On the surface, it was still garden parties, newsletter updates, and passive-aggressive emails about trash can placement. But inside? Panic. They'd started trenching shallow ditches around the pavilion, ripped up 2 rose beds trying to regrade the lawn, even brought in a hydrologist to assess landscaping damage. Too little, too late. Because by then, the County Environmental Division had opened an official investigation, and Miss Halloran had filed a notice of non-compliance against the HOA Development Board. You could smell the shift. Suddenly, their lawyers weren't calling me. They were calling her. Clarissa Haynes, the HOA vice president, was the first to crack. She showed up on my porch one morning in heels completely wrong for soggy ground, carrying a box of pastries like it was a peace offering. "Caroline, we've clearly made some mistakes," she said, her voice tight with corporate guilt. "We're hoping to work this out amicably." I took the pastries, listened politely. Then I asked, "Did you know Margaret's Creek was protected when you buried it?" Her mouth opened, closed. I didn't need her answer. Instead, I handed her a copy of the flood risk reassessment the county had just issued, highlighted in yellow. "South Bend Rec Pavilion is now classified as Wetlands Buffer Zone Level 1. She blinked. "That's impossible. We've got irrigation, drainage." "You had a natural drainage system," I corrected. "You buried it." Clarissa left without finishing her coffee. By May, the garden looked like a battlefield. The grass had yellowed. The mulch was floating in puddles. The HOA had paid to install French drains that immediately clogged because the soil was clay, and no one tested it before building. Then came the public meeting. I wasn't even going to attend, but Miss Halloran said, "You should be there. Let them read it in front of you." So I sat, 3rd row from the back, notebook in hand. Clarissa stood at the podium. Her usual poise looked forced. She read from a prepared statement. "Due to recent regulatory assessments, the South Bend Pavilion Garden area has been identified as an environmentally sensitive zone and will be closed until further notice pending." "Review!" Gasps, confused whispers. One man stood up and asked, "Wait, the whole pavilion?" Clarissa tried to spin it. It's temporary. We're working with county advisors. We hope to reopen for summer events. I raised my hand. Clarissa froze, then reluctantly called on me. Caroline Vance, Parcel 47, I'd just like to ask, if the HOA plans to acknowledge the illegal concrete poured into a recognized waterway, or will you continue pretending this is about a few puddles? Silence. One by one, homeowners turned toward me, and suddenly, they weren't confused anymore. They were angry, because the HOA didn't just mess up my land, they jeopardized theirs. 2 weeks later, a yellow sign appeared at the Pavilion entrance. Flood Risk Area. Entry at own risk. Under review by County Environmental Division, I took a photo, framed it, hung it beside my kitchen calendar, not out of spite, out of closure. The best part? The real flood hadn't even begun. Because Miss Halloran wasn't finished, she filed for wetlands designation on my behalf. Yes, on my behalf. Turns out, if your land holds a protected waterway that's been modified without your consent, and it now floods due to surrounding development, you can petition for elevation to Class B, which comes with 2 benefits. Federal protection fines up to $20,000 per violation for any future interference. The HOA had committed 3. Clarissa called. Again. This time, her tone had changed. Less corporate. More desperate. Caroline, the fines are steep. We're trying to avoid litigation. What would it take to make this go away? I thought about it. Then answered plainly. You owe me restoration, not silence. I sent her a list, full removal, of the concrete from Margaret's Creek restoration of the creek bed with native stone, return flow pattern to pre-construction survey, a public apology at the next HOA meeting, and a permanent 20-foot buffer between their property line and mine filed with the county. They tried to push back, until Miss Halloran reminded them that refusal meant escalating the case to state-level enforcement. They signed within a week. The cleanup started in June. They brought in contractors to break up the concrete, hauled it off in dump trucks, laid new creek stones under the watchful eye of a county inspector who took more photos than a wedding photographer. The rose beds were ripped out. The gazebo? Disassembled and hauled away, and slowly, quietly, Margaret's Creek returned. I stood at the edge of my yard and watched the water flow again, clean and stubborn as ever. And I realized something. They didn't just lose a garden, they lost the illusion that they could control everything. By fall, the Pavilion Gardens had been relabeled, South Bend Natural Wetlands Buffer. They posted new signs, native plantings. No construction, no loud events, just a quiet, soggy patch of land that now existed only because someone tried to erase mine. And failed. Want to see how Caroline used that wetland designation to permanently change zoning laws so no HOA could ever touch Margaret's Creek again? They thought it was over. They thought returning the creek bed, removing the gazebo, and planting some cattails would be the end of it. But the water had changed. So had the land. And so had I. Because once you bury something sacred and pretend it never existed, restoring it isn't a favor. It's the minimum price of ignorance. And I wasn't finished. The county had already signed off on the wetlands designation, but with the concrete gone and the basin reverting to natural flood cycles, Miss Halloran came to me with something bigger. Caroline, she said, pulling out a folder at my kitchen table. Do you want to file for permanent zoning reclassification? What would that mean? It means they won't just pay for what they did. It means they can never do it again. Not here. Not on any land touching Margaret's Creek. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood and walked to the window, looking out over the lawn. Rain had started again, a soft drizzle dancing through the sedges where roses once stood. A slow smile tugged at my lips. Yes, I said. Let's finish this. The process was slow, months of paperwork, site visits, evaluations by state hydrologists and soil analysts. They took samples, ran models, compared rainfall patterns from the last decade to the present, and confirmed what I already knew. The HOA's interference had altered the entire flow table of our district. That made it eligible not just for county classification, but for state-protected watershed zoning, meaning no permanent structures within 50 feet of the creek, no fertilizer use, no soil disturbance, and no HOA authority within the buffer without ecological oversight. In short, I had turned the HOA's backyard showpiece into a federally observed ecosystem, and I wasn't done. I reached out to Mr. Chavez, a soft-spoken civil engineer I met during the creek bed restoration. He'd worked with stormwater departments for over 20 years and knew how to read topography like music. I asked him one question. Can we map every parcel affected by Margaret's Creek overflow? 2 weeks later, he handed me a digital map. It showed 11 properties, 4 of which had backyard sheds, lawn expansions, or retaining walls that now violated the new buffer limits, including the HOA's office patio, which they'd just renovated. With stone seating and a barbecue grill, I emailed the map to Miss Halloran. 2 days later, she filed the buffer compliance notification. The fallout wasn't dramatic, it was bureaucratic. Letters arrived in mailboxes. Quiet panic spread through group chats. The HOA scrambled to explain why homeowners would now have to file annual environmental impact forms just to install garden lights near the flood zone. Some got angry, some left. But many, they came to me. "Caroline," said one woman from Parcel 18, "I didn't know what they'd done. I'm sorry. I just wanted peace and quiet." "You still can have it," I said. "But you'll have to let nature speak a little louder now." That winter, the South Bend HOA tried one last move. They submitted a variance request to the Zoning Commission, attempting to reduce the wetlands buffer by 15 feet. Their argument? Loss of recreational community value. Miss Halloran forwarded me the paperwork with a note. "Want to sit in on this hearing?" I said yes. The zoning meeting was held in a government building that smelled like copy paper and linoleum floors. The panel sat behind a long desk. HOA counsel stood, presenting glossy images of the before and after pavilion. They made it sound tragic, like the loss of lawn space was equivalent to losing a school. Then I stood up. No theatrics, no yelling, just a woman in her late 50s holding a black binder of facts. I opened to the first page. Drone shots of the buried creek, time-stamped. Second page, photos of the flooding, documented by county officials. Third page, surveyor's overlay showing flood expansion into newly built lots. Then I looked each commissioner in the eye. They didn't lose a lawn, I said. They lost control over land they never respected in the first place. The motion to reduce the buffer failed, unanimously. That spring, I received an email. It was from Clarissa. Subject line, regarding future use of South Bend buffer area. She asked politely if I'd be willing to consult on how to build educational nature trails through the area. Signs about local plant life, maybe even a butterfly garden. I didn't say no. But I gave her a condition. If any future project touches soil within 50 feet of the creek, I have full oversight and approval. She agreed. And just like that, I went from the woman they ignored to the woman who signed off on every move they made. You'd think I'd feel victorious, but it wasn't about that anymore. It was about making space, literal and symbolic, for people like me. People who don't shout in meetings or post yard signs or scream into HOA forums. People who carry their history not on their sleeves, but on their deeds. The South Bend HOA quietly rewrote its own rules the next month. They added a new clause. Respect existing ecological features of community-adjacent lands. Violations may result in legal action. It had no name attached, but everyone knew where it came from. And just like Margaret's Creek, I didn't need recognition, just room to flow. Want to see how it all ends, how Caroline's name becomes permanently written into the town's flood maps, And how she ensures no HOA will ever touch her land again? The first time I saw my name on the official zoning map, it was written in small, unassuming letters. Margaret's Creek Buffer Zone, maintained by landholder Caroline Vance. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a map, a name, and a boundary that could no longer be crossed. I printed it, laminated it, and pinned it right next to my grandmother's photo. An old black and white picture of her standing barefoot in the creek with a fishing line tied to a stick. She was maybe 12. The water then looked exactly like it does now. The South Bend HOA never tried to reclaim the Pavilion garden. Not after that. They let the sedges grow tall, let the cattails spread. Once a month, a quiet maintenance crew comes to trim invasive vines and clean the walking path. Not for beauty, but for safety. Because now the area isn't recreational. It's protected. And me? I sit on my porch and sip coffee, watching dragonflies skim across the waterline. The same land they tried to mute now sings louder than ever. They asked me to name the walking trail. Clarissa sent the form in a beige folder. No sticky notes, no assumptions. I returned it unsigned. Instead, I wrote, "Let it remain unnamed. Let the land speak for itself." And so it did. That winter, floodwaters rose again. But this time no one panicked. The buffer held. The creek flowed. The houses remained dry. The land had remembered itself. People began to visit. Students from the local high school walked the trail as part of their environmental science projects. A biology professor asked if she could install monitoring equipment to track soil saturation rates. Even the HOA newsletter began referring to it not as former Pavilion grounds, but as South Bend Natural Reserve. They still sent emails about lawn compliance and recycling bins. But now every footer carried this disclaimer. All construction near the Margaret's Creek Buffer Zone must receive advance review by the Environmental Advisory Committee. I wasn't on the committee. I was the reason it existed, and then came the bench. It showed up one spring morning, made of dark cedar and positioned beneath the tallest willow near the water. A bronze plaque sat bolted into the backrest. To Caroline Vance, who taught us that silence can move rivers. I sat down without a word, felt the curve of it against my spine, listened to the sound of rushing water below, and I cried, not because I'd won, but because something ancient had been restored, and this time it would outlive me. The town council invited me to speak at the annual preservation forum. I said no. I don't like stages. I like boundaries, but they still named me in their environmental stewardship report. My name sat under the civic impact column right next to infrastructure grants and county restoration credits. I didn't need applause, needed permanence. You might think this story ends with a peaceful neighborhood, restored wetlands, and a woman finally at ease. And it does. But it also ends with legacy. Because that creek, it's untouchable now. Easement locked, environmentally zoned, federally documented. No future board, developer, or politician can redraw its course without dealing with a wall of code thicker than concrete. And I made sure of that. You see, before I closed this chapter for good, I filed one last piece of paperwork, a conservation easement, registered with the state, naming Margaret's Creek and the 75 feet on either side as a permanent natural habitat. The clause was ironclad. No commercial use, no structural development, no alteration of flow may occur for any purpose. And when I die, that easement passes to the Land Preservation Trust, not to the HOA, not to the county, to the land itself. A young woman from Parcel 19 came by recently. She's new, maybe early 30s. 2 kids. We spoke over the fence. "I heard you saved this place," she said, gesturing at the creek. I smiled. "No, the creek saved itself. I just stopped them from damming its voice." She grinned. "Well, whatever. You did." Thank you. My kids love watching the frogs after it rains. Then she paused. You know, you should write this down. What you did. It matters. I didn't respond. But today, maybe I am writing it down. Not for credit, but for you. So, you remember, when they bury something sacred, don't raise your voice. Raise your documents. Raise your boundaries. Raise your patience like a hammer, and let them pour their arrogance into the soil, because water remembers, and the land will always reclaim its truth. They filled my creek with concrete. So I turned their gardens into a memory and left my name where no HOA could reach it, in the map and in the mud.